Barley Wine.
Hi, I'm Brian.
I'm Terica, and you're watching CS Brews. It's a Fermentation Friday, which means we're making something new, and we're making something that lots of people have requested, and it's Barley Wine!
Yeah, and she's really excited about this. By the way, a lot has come up about what is barley wine and what is beer. Here's the truth. Barley wine is beer. Sorry to ruin it for you. I know this is going to be like a 20 to 25 minute video. Watch to the end because there's some stuff you want to know. But basically, the main difference between barley wine and beer is ABV. Now, over the last several years, the lines have blurred a little bit. People are starting to make, higher proof ales and beers, so it's not as much a defining difference. There is a little bit of a difference when you get into it, though, American versus, say, British style. American style usually is more hoppy and has a different kind of character, whereas the British ones are a little less hoppy, they're sweeter, they're darker, richer. That's more or less what we're going after today. We want something that you can drink and appreciate, but some things that make barley wine interesting are, I'm not going to put it in a little 12-ounce bottle, it's probably going to go into the lemonade bottles, and I'm making it with a little bit of a chocolate flavor to it. So we're using some cacao nibs, we're using some chocolate malt. We want it to be dark, but not like black, and we want it to have, good, strong, rich flavors, like a stout is basically what this is. It's a stout. Anyway, to get started, we got to put together our mash bill. And for this, I'm using several different kinds of malts, okay? So don't get too confused, and if you don't have all these, it's kind of okay. It's not an actual requirement. Something that's come up when we did beer videos in the past where we used full grains is I said barley. I apparently left off the malt part. You have to use malted barley. You can use regular barley as an adjunct, but as your main, you really have to use malted barley. That's what helps convert the starches into sugars. So to start off, we're going to use 2-row malted barley. Now this has been crushed at my local brew store and all that kind of thing, and I'm going to use about 3 pounds of it. So I'm going to tear out my scale. Put the dust on. Okay, so I got my 3 pounds of 2-row malted barley. Now, something I want to go over is you have your main malts and you have your adjuncts. Adjuncts don't give so much sugars as flavor, so they're much smaller quantities and they're usually very dark. The main difference between the malts is how long they've been roasted. A 2-row has been roasted a lot less time than, say, a chocolate malt or a patent malt. That's black patent malt. Now, the reason I chose 3 pounds, normally I'd use like 1 pound when I'm making a beer, but each pound is about 35 points depending on your efficiency, depending on a lot of factors. So I'm looking to make this more like a 15 or so % barley wine. Yes, I know most are 10 to 12, but you know what? If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. Someone said that to me recently. So we're going for like 15 or 16% here. I'm trying to get a little bit higher. That said, I'm hoping that some of the roasted barley and the black patents actually do add a little bit of sugars to this, because otherwise we might end up at about 12, which wouldn't be completely disappointing, but it wouldn't be the 15 or 16 that I'm after. So anyway, we have our 3 pounds there. I'm going to add some black patent malt. Now, this is seriously strong stuff, okay? This gives color. I'm going to use about 1 ounce. That's it. I don't really want to put a lot of this in there because it'll get too... So that's 1 ounce black patent. Then roasted barley. Now this isn't necessarily absolutely necessary for this, but it does add a little bit of a roasted, like almost a smoky flavor. Yeah, this is just lovely stuff. It also adds more color. So again, I'm going to go with 1 ounce roasted barley, and if you can see the color on that, see it's almost as dark. It looks like chocolate, really. Then chocolate malt. Now, it's not really chocolatey. It's more the color. Again, we're adding a lot, like 3 ounces of adjunct malts like this is actually quite a bit in a 1 gallon brew. By the way, yes, we're making 1 gallon. But I was going to go with 1 ounce. I think I'm going to go with 1.5, just because I'm feeling adventurous. So let me go with 1.5 here. So now, if you've been following along, 35 points per pound per gallon for our 2-row. And then we added like another 3.5 ounces, which are going to give us hardly anything. So I'm saying like maybe 5 points for all of those adjuncts. So that means 35 times 3 is 1.105 plus 5. It's only 1.110. You know what? I think I'm going to add 4 more ounces of 2-row. If you're curious why I did that, it's because I'm actually looking for a target gravity of somewhere around 1.120. That way I know I can get to like that 14-15% range. That extra 4 ounces, well, it doesn't make a huge difference. It did get me closer to that range, and we'll see how good my efficiency is as to whether I can actually get it up that high. Okay, so this is our grains. It's a lot of grains for 1 gallon. So much so that it was actually going to be really hard to do the mash-in process. The mash-in process, by the way, is where you heat the grains with water to about 150 to 160 degrees and hold it there for about an hour. What happens is the enzymes in the grains actually start to convert the starches into sugars that the yeast can actually consume and convert into alcohol. Sounds complicated. It's really not. We're going to show you right. Okay, so to begin the mash-in process, what I've done is I heated water to about 180 to 185 degrees, about 2 gallons of water, by the way, and we have our grains. I also have a boiling bag right here, and I'm just going to dump the grains right in and spill them on the floor, apparently, and both sides. So we have our grains in there. Now I'm going to take the water and hopefully not make as much of a mess because this is hot. Don protective gloves. Start pouring it in. What I want to do is make sure there's no lumps in there, also known as dough balls. So for that, and what I want to do is just get in here and move this around a bit, being very careful to not pull the bag off the side. And I'm just stirring that up so that all the grains are wet, okay? That's really all I want to do is make sure that the grains are wet. Now, we just had a rubber band holding this together. Take that off of there, and I'm going to tie the bag in a knot. Some bags have a drawstring. This particular one does not. And you want to work sort of quickly with this because you're losing heat every minute. Now we're using a big cooler because it's the most efficient way we've found to maintain the temperature. Because again, with hitting the water hitting the sides and hitting the grains, it will drop temperature a bit. So we want it to get down to about 150 for roughly an hour. Let's see how we did. It's at 166 right now, but that will go down and it'll cool off a bit, which to me, that sounds good. Seal this up, see you in an hour. Okay, so it's been about an hour. I'll crack this guy open. Take a look at what we have. First thing I want to do is take a temperature to see about how well we did. Ending at 152, 153. Yeah, okay, we're right in that magic number area that we want to be. That way we extracted the most that we can get from this. And because we're using a boiling bag system, I'm literally just going to pull this bag out, let it drain as much as possible. Now, one thing that we are going to do with these grains is I'm not going to toss them. This is such a high quantity of grains and it's such a high gravity wort that I think we might be able to do what's called a second running out of this and make this would be the big beer and then make a small beer afterwards, which will be another video that you'll get to see soon. But for right now, what I want to do is get this after it stops spinning on me into a colander. It's really hot. And get that into the pot. All right, so this has been straining for a couple minutes. It got some more wort out. I'm just literally going to move this into the bucket and dump the bag out for now. Because again, second runnings, that's what that's for. So this is just gonna go in the sink. Now, what we have here is our main wort, okay? And I'm gonna take what's in this bucket here and dump this in. This is what's going to get boiled. Oh. Lovely dark color. Now I'm just going to turn this on and let it start to get to boil. What we're going to use is some hops additions, and generally you put some in as it gets to boil at the half-hour mark, and then like 5 minutes before the boil is over. We'll get to that once this comes to a boil. Okay, so this came to a boil and it started getting a little bit violent and it looked like it was going to overflow. So I have it half on the burner. That's a neat little trick. You give it a little stir. If you notice, the foam is on one side, the boiling's on this side. So it is actually boiling. And at this point, I'm just going to add in
my hops. Now this is Cascade hop pellets. We're using 3 additions of 0.4 ounces each. This is at the start of the boil mark. So I'm just going to drop them in there. Give that a little bit of a stir just so that they don't maybe stick to the bottom or burn. We're going to let that boil for about 30 minutes. So let me set my timer. And then we'll do our next addition then. Okay, so it's been a half an hour. Time for second addition. Now you want to be careful when you're adding your hops. I'm going to push this off the burner just a wee bit more. And it's hot. I'm pushing it off the burner because they tend to foam up when you put these in. So I'm dropping them in. Give it a stir so nothing sticks. Put it back on that burner until it starts to boil up again on one side. Something I want to go over at this point. You'll notice the level is dropping. We want that to happen. Essentially, what's going to happen is we're boiling off more of the water that we had to use for the mash-in process because there was just so much grain. I had to use a lot of water or else the grain wouldn't have fit. So now I want to boil off a lot of that to concentrate these sugars so I can get a higher gravity wort. Make sense? And see you in 25 minutes. All right, so it's been another 25 minutes and it's time for our third and final hop addition. Again, these are Cascade hops and these are 0.4 ounce additions. There will be 5 minutes left after this one, and if you look in the pot, see it's almost down to about halfway down that pot, which means we have concentrated those sugars quite nicely. Let me just give this a stir as we've done all along so nothing sticks to the bottom and burns. It did boil over on us a little bit at one point, and well, you know, you lose a little tiny bit when that happens and you try to avoid it, but it does happen. Foam overs happen. That's why a lot of people will use a much larger pot. For the sake of filming and ease of use, we're using a smaller pot, which lend itself to a foam over just a little bit more easily. So 5 more minutes, and then it's done. All right, so the boil is finished. Now we want to cool this wort down. Now some people use wort chillers, things like that. Me, I'm a purist. I use my bathtub. Okay, so we mashed it, we boiled it, and now what we want to do is strain it and get it into here. But before I do that, I'm thinking, do I want to hydrate my yeast? There's been some discussion on this lately, and people have said you don't need to. Manufacturers actually say you don't need to. So you know what? I'm not going to do it this time. Also because I don't want to introduce more liquid into the brew. I think I actually got this down to the 1 gallon mark. So I'm really happy about that, and I don't want to make it worse. So, now comes the messy part. Can you just balance those things for me? Here we go. Now, in case you're wondering what I'm straining out, all the spent hops and other stuff that has fallen out of solution. It's really disgusting, and while yes, it will actually settle to the bottom and you just siphon it off at the end, it's kind of, if you can avoid having it in your brew at all, avoid it. So to those of you who are curious just how much we got out of there with colander, yeah, quite a bit. And I'm good with that. Anything more is just going to be muck. So just throw that in this pot. It's a very messy thing to make beer. It just is. That's the way it works. I can't come up with a way to make it neater. So next, I'm going to take a hydrometer reading. And we do this so that we know about where it starts, so that we know how far it went, so that we know how much ABV we have, that kind of thing. Because in order to be barley wine, it has to be, I'm guessing, at least 10%. The moment of truth. However, I'm very happy about one thing. If you look, here's the level. We started with 2 gallons, just about. I mean, like maybe half a quart less than 2 gallons of water. It looks like we might have less than a gallon here, which is great. That means concentration of sugars. Let's just find out what we got. The other thing that I'm liking about this, if you look at it, see that color? It's nice and dark brown. It's not black. I didn't want pure black. I wanted a dark beer, not a black beer. I'm gonna say 1098. Now, that's a little short of what I wanted, but you know what? Efficiencies being what they are, things like that, I'm okay with that because that gives me a potential still somewhere like maybe 13 to 15%. So I'm pretty cool with that. I mean, that's kind of awesome for a beer. Now, some people at this point, instead of doing what we did where we concentrated those sugars, they will add sugar to this. Now, I can totally do that, but to me, I wanted to keep this as pure a barley wine as possible because, as I've said before, white sugar, while it does increase the ABV, doesn't really add much to the party as far as flavor goes. So I didn't want to just boost the alcohol for the sake of boosting the alcohol. I'd rather it be, you know, real starches and sugars that came from the beer itself.
And it is a barley wine, so we want it to be
Right.
strong on
Right.
the grain aspect.
By the way, the name barley wine, when I looked it up, the only reason why it's actually called that is because of the ABV. That's the only reason. This isn't really a wine at all. It is actually a beer. That is the definition of it. But anyway, some things that we want to do. I have here 1 ounce of cacao nibs, which is simply just the husks of chocolate. It smells a little bit like chocolate. Yeah, a little bit like a bitter, dark chocolate. And we are going to put them in here in primary, and they're going to sit in this for the full primary. Sometimes people will sit this in vodka for a few days and then just use the vodka, which is another way to raise your ABV too. But they're doing that like long after in secondary. I'm doing it in primary because I think this will add a little bit of nitrogen for the yeast, and I want to see what the flavors do. I've had good luck doing it this way before. I'm going to try it again. I'm just going to sprinkle them in. We're going to agitate when we add the yeast. Speaking of yeast, I have here a package of Lalvin EC 1118 yeast. It is also known as champagne yeast, and you're probably wondering, but this is a beer. Yeah, but it's a high ABV beer. And you might think, oh, you're going to make it go dry. Well, no, not really. There's one thing about beer and barley fermentations is that there's always non-fermentable sugars in there. That's why a beer almost never goes to 1.000. It always goes to like 1010 or 1015. It's because there are non-fermentable sugars in there. There's going to be a lot of non-fermentable sugars in here, and I'm planning on that. Where a typical beer that starts at, say, 1050 to 1060 and ends at 1010, well, this starts at 1100, give or take, should end at maybe 1020, 1022 or so. I'm hoping for that. So it really doesn't matter what yeast I use, as long as that yeast can handle the amount of alcohol produced, which in this case is between 12 and 15%. I thought about Lalvin D47. I thought about 71B, and I thought, but I don't want to stop these before and leave residual starch sugars. I want to actually just have the non-fermentable sugars for that body mouthfeel and extra flavor. So that's when I came up with using EC 1118. Just seemed like the best choice. Also, I'm going to do something a little bit differently this time. Because this is a little bit of a higher gravity must, I normally say use half a packet up to about 3 gallons. This time I'm going to use a whole packet in this 1 gallon because I want to give this the best chance possible to get that colony going and start up. I've heard some people, I don't really know why, but some people have said barley wines that are higher gravities like this are a little harder on the yeast. Okay, I'll go with that. Let's give the colony the best chance.
So some people get confused about yeast amounts, and we've heard multiple times people say, well, I put more yeast in there so it's going to have a higher ABV.
Yeah, I actually got into an argument with somebody the other day about that.
That simply is not true. Yeast can only produce as much alcohol as they can produce, regardless of how many are in there. The reason why Brian put the whole packet in there is because he's going to start with a larger colony so that they have a better chance of forming their little community and doing their little fermentation process. So if we just put a few yeasts in there, then there may have been a chance that some of them were dead already, because that does happen, and they may not be in an environment where they could reproduce readily to get a big colony. So this way they have a big colony right from the get-go.
So the argument that I had with someone in, it was on a YouTube video. I'm not going to mention which one. Someone was claiming that they can get 20 to 28% alcohol in the brew that was made. And someone was defending that, saying, well, this yeast will do that. This yeast will go to 28%. My comment was that there's no way this is going to go that high. It's going to go more like 12 to 15. Was based on the fact that they didn't use enough sugar to go to 20 to 28%, not the yeast. And when I presented that option to the person, they said, no, you're wrong. The yeast determines how much alcohol is in there. At that point, I wanted to direct them to our channel so I could explain better, but again, didn't really feel like starting a war with an unarmed opponent.
Fermentations, when you think about the process and all the different things that are involved, is more like an aquarium setup than it is like a science project, if that makes sense. So yes, yeasts have tolerances and they will go to this amount, but only if they're given enough food and the right environment to go to that amount. So if you have an aquarium with fish in it and you don't feed them, your fish are going to die regardless of how big they would naturally get. And if you have a little tiny aquarium and you feed them a little bit, they're only going to get as big as they can within that environment. Whereas if you have a huge aquarium and you have the right amount of food and the right amount of everything, then they're going to get to their full potential.
I hate these plastic buckets. They never seal right. There we go.
This side is good.
Okay, so the final step in doing this is to add our airlock, and it's just basically to keep the bugs out. People have been telling me, oh, you can just leave a screwed on lid half undone and stuff. And you know what? You can. You can do all those things if you really want to, but the first time you ruin a brew, you're going to say, damn, wish I just used that $2 airlock like Brian said to. So that's why we pushed
It's
this.
just $2!
So, some things about what we did here too. This was cooled down to almost room temperature. It was about like maybe 85 degrees by the time it went in here. So nice and cool. Going by that, we probably could add a couple points to our gravity just for whatever. I'm not that concerned. I mean, to me, there's more inaccuracy in me trying to read through the bubbles than there is in the amount from the temperature difference of 10 degrees. Don't care. But what's going to happen to this now? This is going to go probably somewhere to my left, because my desk of fermentation is quite full. We have a lot of racking videos to go on and get done. But it's going to sit for probably a couple of weeks, okay? Beers can be done in 3 to 5 days sometimes, but this one's a little higher gravity, so we want to let this go a while. And I'm going to let it go till it's completely done. I'm not going to be adding anything to it to stop it, to stabilize it, to prematurely kill off these. Nothing. I'm not even going to cold crash this. I rarely cold crash, to be honest. A lot of people have been asking that lately. I rarely, if ever, cold crash. You know what? Time is your friend. Let it sit. There's no rush to rack. There's no rush to bottle. Let them go. The longer you let it go, the better it's going to be. Until you start talking multiple years. Then, you know, you want to get it off the lease.
And our brews never last that long because we get thirsty.
We drink them. Anyway. So this will sit for a couple weeks. Then you'll see the next part of this video, which is going to be racking and natural carbonating into bottles. Until then, thanks for watching and have a great day.
Bye-bye.